I found out I had a sexually transmitted infection, and I'd been with the same woman, my wife, for 11 years. So I did the math the way you're doing it right now. There's only one explanation. She cheated. It's over. I sat in my car outside the clinic, and I could feel my whole life reorganizing around that one fact. The house, the kids, the lawyer I was already composing in my head. And then a doctor told me something that stopped me cold. Something that made the obvious answer a lot less obvious. Not because it proved she was innocent, but because it proved my panic was about to make the most expensive decision of my life before I had a single actual fact. Let me tell you who I am, so you know why I get to say this. I'm not a doctor. I'm a guy who walked into a clinic for something routine and walked out holding a result that felt like a signed confession from the person I trusted most. And I'm the guy who almost detonated an 11-year marriage in the 48 hours before I understood what that result actually meant. And before I go further, the man in this story is a composite, and the details are changed. But every medical fact I'm about to give you is real and checkable. This isn't gossip. It's the biology that almost nobody explains at the exact moment you'd give anything to understand it. Now, I want to be clear about what this video is not. It is not, here's proof she cheated. And it is not, relax, it's definitely innocent. I don't know your marriage, and neither does anyone in a comment section. What I can do is hand you the thing I didn't have in that parking lot. The facts that decide whether you're looking at a betrayal or a misunderstanding that could cost you your family. Because here's the reframe it took me a terrifying week to earn. A positive test is not a verdict, it's a question. And the worst thing you can do with a question is answer it with panic. So let me give you what the doctor gave me, because it genuinely reorganized my understanding of what an STI even is. Most people picture an STI like catching a cold. You were exposed recently, you have it now, so somebody recent gave it to you. For a couple of infections, that's roughly true. For the most common ones, it is spectacularly false. And the gap between those two facts is where marriages get destroyed by mistake. Start with herpes, HSV. It is far more common than anyone says out loud because almost nobody talks about it. The CDC estimates that around 87% of people who have HSV-2 have never been diagnosed. Let that land. Nearly 9 out of 10 people carrying it don't know. And more than 80% of infections are completely asymptomatic. No sores, no signs, nothing. You can carry it for years and have no idea. And here's the part that matters for a marriage. Herpes can lie dormant for months or years before the first outbreak you'd ever notice. And that first outbreak is often triggered by stress or illness. So picture this. A person carries it silently since before they ever met their spouse. Years go by. Then a stressful season hits, and the body finally produces a symptom, or a routine test finally picks it up. Nothing happened. Nobody strayed. The virus just surfaced on its own timeline, which has nothing to do with fidelity. Now, HPV, which is even more common. Sexually active people are almost all exposed to HPV at some point in their lives. It's nearly universal. And it can stay dormant in your body for years, sometimes decades, with no symptoms and no detection. Which is why the experts say something that should be printed on every clinic wall. In a long monogamous relationship, an HPV diagnosis means only that the person got it at some point in their life. And, this is the exact quote that saved me, there is no sure way to know when you were infected. No sure way to know when. Read that again, slowly, if you're where I was. because I had assumed the timeline was obvious. I have it now, so it happened now, so it happened with someone now. And the medicine just calmly took that entire chain of logic apart. For the most common STIs, now can mean 15 years ago. It can mean before the wedding. It can mean before you two ever met, carried silently by either one of you, surfacing on a schedule that answers to biology, not betrayal. And notice, this cuts both ways, which is the honest part. It could have been in me the whole time, and I never knew. 87% undiagnosed means I could have been one of them. When I got that result, my very first move was to assume I was the victim and she was the guilty one. But the same science that might clear her implicates the possibility that I brought it into the marriage myself years ago from a life I'd half forgotten. That is a very humbling thing to realize in a parking lot. So the signed confession I thought I was holding? For an infection like HSV or HPV, it isn't a confession at all. It's a photograph with no date on it. It tells you something exists. It tells you nothing about when or how or who. And if I had walked into my house that night and said the sentence I was rehearsing, "I know what you did," I would have been detonating 11 years of a life based on a document that, medically, could not support the accusation I was about to make. But, and this is where I have to be fair, and where a lot of feel-good takes go quiet, that is not the end of the story. Because not every infection is a photo with no date. Some of them come with a timestamp, and you have to know which one you're holding. Here's the distinction that actually matters, the one question that changes everything, and the one I didn't even know to ask. Not all STIs behave the same way. Herpes and HPV are the ghosts. They hide for years, decades, no reliable timestamp. But a second group behaves completely differently. The bacterial and parasitic ones, gonorrhea, chlamydia, trichomoniasis. These don't lie dormant for a decade. They announce themselves fast. Gonorrhea has an incubation period of roughly 1 to 14 days. Chlamydia, about 1 to 3 weeks. Trichomoniasis, around 5 to 28 days. Days and weeks, not years. So if what you're holding is a fresh case of gonorrhea or chlamydia in a relationship that's supposed to be closed and has been for years, that is a genuinely different conversation. That is not a ghost with no date. That's a timestamp pointing at the recent past. It's not absolute proof. An early infection can go undetected. Rare, non-sexual roots exist. But it is a real, serious red flag, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of lie. You see the point. The word STD told me almost nothing. The specific name of the infection told me almost everything. One category can be a decades-old ghost. The other can be a recent fingerprint. And I had been ready to end my marriage without even knowing which one I had. So the first move, before the confrontation, before the lawyer, before the sentence you can't take back, is stunningly simple. Find out exactly what it is. Type-specific testing exists precisely for this. Get the name. Then learn how that specific infection behaves, how long it can hide, how fast it shows. And get both of you tested, because the truth is a two-person document, not a one-person accusation. You don't need to be a detective. You need to be a person who gets the actual facts before making an irreversible decision. Which, it turns out, is the entire skill this channel is about. Because here's what I finally understood, sitting in that parking lot with my heart going like a war drum. The infection wasn't the real threat to my life. The panic was. Think about what panic does. It takes a single, ambiguous data point, a test result with no date on it, and it fills in every blank with the worst possible story, instantly. And then it hands you a pen. It doesn't wait for the second fact. It doesn't ask which infection. It doesn't get both people tested. It just wants you to act right now on the version of reality that hurts the most. Because that one feels like the strong response, the decisive one, the one that protects your dignity. And it is the single most expensive impulse a human being can have. Because look at what was actually on the table in those 48 hours. 11 years, a home, children who did nothing, a shared life with 1,000 roots. And divorce, real divorce, is not just heartbreak. The longer the marriage, the deeper the financial entanglement, the larger the settlement, the more that gets divided and unwound. An 11-year exit is a different animal than a 2-year one, emotionally and financially. And I was about to trigger all of it in a single sentence, based on a photograph with no date. That's the trap this whole channel exists to warn you about. It's the same trap whether the shock is an STI, a suspicious text, a hidden account, a stranger's name. A piece of frightening information arrives, and the panic tells you that acting immediately is the same thing as being strong. It is not. Acting immediately on incomplete facts, on the most catastrophic interpretation, is not strength. It's just fear wearing strength's clothing. And I want to name the other failure mode too, because I'm not selling you comfortable denial. The opposite mistake is just as real. Burying a genuine red flag because facing it is too painful. Telling yourself, it's probably nothing, it's one of those dormant ones, when the actual test is a fresh bacterial infection with a 2-week timestamp. That's not peace. That's just panic pointed in the other direction. The panic of not wanting your life to change, so you refuse to look. Both mistakes come from the same place. Both are decisions made to escape the discomfort of not knowing yet. And the only way out, the only one, is to sit in that discomfort long enough to get the facts. Which infection? How it behaves? Both people tested. An actual conversation instead of an accusation or a denial. That was the hardest thing I have ever done. To walk into my house holding that result and not say the sentence. To instead say, something came back on a test, and I don't understand it yet, and I need us to figure it out together. Not an accusation, not a performance of trust I didn't feel. Just the truth, that I had a frightening fact and not enough facts around it. And here's what I want to be honest about, because this isn't a fairy tale, and I won't insult you with one. I don't get to tell you how that conversation ends for you. For some people who do this, the facts come back, and it really was a dormant infection from a life long before, and a marriage survives a scare that would have killed it if handled with panic. For others, the facts come back with a timestamp, and a real betrayal finally gets looked at in the light. And even then, you're now making the biggest decision of your life on the truth instead of on terror. Both of those are better than what panic offered me. Panic offered me certainty without facts, and a decision I could never take back. The facts offered me something slower and harder, and infinitely more valuable. The chance to respond to my actual life, instead of to the horror movie my fear was screening in my head. And I want to say the humbling part out loud one more time, because the internet will never say it for you. My first instinct was 100% certainty that I was the wronged party, and she was the villain. The science made me hold open the possibility that I brought it in myself years ago and never knew. A marriage doesn't survive one person appointing himself judge, prosecutor, and victim in a parking lot. It survives two people walking toward the truth together, even when they're terrified of what it might be. So let me tell you what the moment of clarity actually looked like, because it wasn't dramatic. It was the opposite of dramatic, and that's the whole point. It was the two of us at a kitchen table, both scared, with a piece of paper between us, the specific name of the infection, and a printout about how that specific infection behaves. Not a shouting match, not a confession scene from a movie. Just two adults, refusing to let the most frightening version of the story win by default. Doing the unglamorous work of finding out what was actually true. And here's the quiet thing I need you to sit in. Whatever that paper said, and I'm not going to tell you, because your paper will say its own thing. The paper was never the real test. The real test was whether I could be a man who responds to facts instead of a man who's run by fear. Whether I could hold the most painful uncertainty of my life for a few days without setting fire to everything to make the uncertainty stop. Because that's what the panic really wanted. It didn't actually want the truth. It wanted the discomfort to end. And ending the discomfort by accusing or by denying would have felt like relief for about an hour. And then I'd have spent years living inside the consequences of a decision I made in a parking lot with half a fact. The most expensive thing in that whole story was never the infection. Infections get treated, managed, understood. The most expensive thing on the table was my own certainty. The counterfeit certainty that panic sells you for free and then charges you your entire life to keep. I almost paid it. I came so close. And the only thing that stopped me was a doctor taking 30 seconds to explain that a test result is a photograph with no date, and me being just barely disciplined enough to let that sentence slow my hand before it signed something it couldn't take back. So whatever you're holding right now, a result, a text, a feeling, I'm not going to tell you it's nothing, and I'm not going to tell you it's everything. I'm going to tell you the one thing I wish someone had said to me before I nearly wrecked my life to escape not knowing. You are allowed to not know yet. And not yet is not weakness. It's the only place the truth can actually reach you. So if you take nothing else from a stranger who nearly got this catastrophically wrong, take these 3 steps, in this order. First, get the specific name. An STD is not information. The exact infection is. Type-specific testing exists for a reason, because HSV or HPV can be a decades-old ghost with no date, while gonorrhea, chlamydia, or trichomoniasis carry a timestamp of days to weeks. You cannot think clearly until you know which one you're holding. Second, both of you get tested and learn how that specific infection behaves. The truth is a 2-person document. And remember the humbling fact, with the most common infections, either of you could have carried it silently for years, from before you ever met. 9 out of 10 people with HSV-2 never knew they had it. That's not naive. That's the actual data. Third, and this is the one that saves lives and marriages and bank accounts, do not make the irreversible decision inside the panic. Talk to a doctor. Have the honest conversation, not the accusation and not the denial. And if the facts do point to betrayal, then you talk to a lawyer in your state, calmly, with information. Because an 11-year exit made in cold facts is survivable, and one made in a hot parking lot is a disaster. This is a map, not medical or legal advice. The result felt like the end of my life. It turned out to be a test of whether I could think when it counted most. So let me ask you, what decision are you one panicked hour away from making that a few real facts might completely change? Be honest. Drop it below.